Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the first presentation of a series, one of few that we'll have in the next few weeks and months. Those presentations have been collected and gathered for everyone in Costa Rica that is interested to learn a little more about solar and energy storage, about the net metering, and about different aspects that we'll discuss in the next few weeks and months. So I really thank you for taking the time, joining us. And this first presentation will be discussing about the net metering in Costa Rica, the way it is today and the way it will be tomorrow. So first of all, just to start with some technicality over here, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's different segments. Some of them is the Q&A, the questions and answer segment. You can click on that, you can raise your hand, and we will be very happy to answer any of your questions. If it will go with the flow of the presentation as we're going, we'll answer. Otherwise, we'll roll the questions over to the questions and answer period, which will have plenty of time for that as well. So just feel free to raise your hand and ask some questions. In this presentation, we'll talk about two main segments. The first one is about today's net metering policy, how it's been put in place from the past. And then we'll go on the way of how the proposed new policy will take place, or how we hope that a part of it will take place. So in between the different segment, we'll take a 5-minute break so everyone can go and grab something to eat, go to the bathroom, ask some more questions, and we'll continue after that with another, the final section. Just so you all know, this webinar is being recorded, and each of you will get to your email a recording of this email, a link, so you can get back to it and just, anything that you've been missing or want to go back and take a look, you will have it available. In the same breath, I also like to let you know that this presentation also has different internal links that will be shared with you. It has lots of great, very, very relevant information. Many of it is also in English that we've been translating for you guys. So sincerely, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start just a few words about our company. Costa Rica Solar Solutions is a company that's been over here for, well, since 2005. It's one of the oldest companies in country, and very proud to be leading in many different new sectors are coming on its way. In that period of about 15 years, we have already 200 systems that we have been permitted. We've been through all of the processes with the different electric companies and gained like a good chunk of information of how to do it in the right way. We're leading the sectors of all that has to do with energy storage, solar edge, and LG throughout Latin America. Today we have more than 80 LG batteries that are installed in countries, the same one as you can see in the background. And we will also give you some more information about that in the next few seminars. So I just want to let you know that my name is Ben Shalev, and I'm very proud to present Scott Benson, the CEO of the company and part owner, that will lead this presentation. Thank you, and Scott, please take it from here.
Thanks, Ben. Again, thank you for attending our seminar or webinar. We're really excited about doing some of these series so that we can get everybody on the same page and educating them about what's going on in Costa Rica in the solar industry. So let's start out with today's net metering policy. So we're going to talk about, we're going to be covering first, what is the current net metering policy and how it came to be. The second is going to be a 49% rule that's part of the current policy, and how it's being misunderstood, and how a lot of people are being misguided about what it means. Then we're going to be talking about something called the 15% rule, and that's actually about the circuit community or whatever, but the 15% rule, and how the electric companies are using this to control the marketplace. And then we're going to be talking about problems with the current permitting system. So, like Ben was saying, everybody's going to be getting this this presentation via email, and it has a lot of interesting links in it. So at the very beginning here, we actually put links to all the players and also reports, and also the current draft of the proposal that's going to be going into place hopefully sometime within the year. So who are the players that are in the net metering policy? The current net metering policy was implemented back in 2015. It is a presidential decree, not a law. So it hasn't gone through Congress. It was done with this current president. And prior to 2014, Costa Rica Electric Companies, or ISE, had a program called the Piloto. The Piloto actually has been going on, or was going on, since 2006. And actually, Costa Rica Solar Solutions had the very first system that was tied to the grid back then. The Piloto program, which was a pilot program, was a 1-for-1 kilowatt hour, but no tariff. Today's simple net metering policy is a 1-for-1 kilowatt hour with a storage fee that we call a tariff. And that's being governed by the Ministry of MINAE. MINAE, again, is in charge of the regulations, and RSEP, which is a governmental agency, is in charge of the tariff fees for the meters that are being used. If nobody understands what RSEP really is, they actually govern all fees. For instance, your bus fees, your gas, and everything is being controlled by RSEP. A little side note about that is Costa Rica is in kind of a interesting situation where their fees or their rates are actually calculated based on the producer or the electric company's operational budget. It's very unusual, but RSEP takes in consideration the electric company's operational budget to determine what you pay for your electricity. This net metering policy is actually one of the first in Central America, and it really was open, or was meant to open up the solar industry, not only for ISE, because prior to this, ISE had the Piloto program, but it was set up to actually help all the electric companies and all the consumers in Costa Rica. So this gave the consumers for all of Costa Rica the option to self-generate their own energy. And this is called distributed generation. So when we look at the tariffs, we can say a storage fee. You can actually see on this photo here, ISE, CNFL, HOSEC, and all the others, they have different tariff fees. But in reality, when you switch that over, or you change it over to dollars, it's between 3 cents to 5 cents per kilowatt hour of any energy that you put into the grid and you bring back from the grid. And you'll see that this is a huge change, because the minimum normally in Costa Rica is 17 cents per kilowatt hour. And of course, that's including taxes. But it goes all the way up to, and we've seen as high, as up to 32 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see where the savings is. Huge savings by using solar.
So
Now
Scott,
let's talk.
Can we jump for a second and let everyone know what is, if then, the difference between the Plan Piloto and the current plan regarding the tariff structure and the benefits?
Well, again, when we look at the Plan Piloto, we had a lot of people that were installing, again, that were on the ESA side, all up and down, the coast areas at that time. And when they were under the Plan Piloto, again, any kilowatt hour that they brought into the grid and they brought back, it was a 1-for-1 exchange with no tariff. So if you used 2,000 kilowatt hours in a month and you injected 2,000 kilowatt hours into the grid and you brought it back at night, that means you would not have a tariff, and you could literally get to a bill where it was $5 just for taxes. That was it, or zero. We have a lot of clients that were under that Plan Piloto that, again, they're not being billed tariffs for any energy that they put in the grid. Now, with the current policy, we have a lot of clients that, maybe use up 500 kilowatt hours to 1,200 to 3,000 to 4,000 kilowatt hours. A normal bill might be $500 a month. But by the time they use the net metering policy as today, their bill is $30 a month, because depending on their consumption pattern, they're putting into the grid and they're bringing back from the grid, and they're only paying 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the benefit.
Okay. No, thank you.
So let's take a look at the 49% rule. It's very interesting because when this first came out, when the policies came out, there were certain key factors that a lot of companies were saying, 49% rule. This thing's horrible. It's going to disrupt the whole, the whole industry. And they actually had a misunderstanding of what this rule actually was. To understand what the 49% rule is, which, by the way, a lot of them would say, oh, you're only going to get credit of 49% of whatever you inject into the grid or produce. We've heard a lot of different stories from this. And so they would actually design their systems to be only 49% of what their consumption was, not understanding that the pattern of how they consume that energy is vitally important. In order to understand this rule, you have to understand it's based on the production of your system, not about the amount of energy that you put into the grid, because you won't lose any energy. The amount that is left over, if you don't use all this energy that you put into the grid, it will roll over to the next month, and it will keep going over and over and over until you have one day a year that everything resets to zero. The caveat to this is that you need 2 meters. Now, this is not unusual. Actually, we've seen a lot of places around the world that you actually have a production meter. In other words, a meter that goes between your inverter and to the grid. So it's showing how much production you make. And then you have another one, which is a utility meter. That's a bidirectional meter, meaning it goes both ways. And both of those actually help determine what your consumption, what you're being billed under. Okay. It's very important to understand that is, you have to have 2 meters to it. And in Costa Rica, the way it's set up is both of those meters have to be at the edge of the property. Otherwise, you'll use another method, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So let's go over an example, because it is confusing for a lot of people. With our systems that we install, we use the Solar Edge. And as you can see by this graph here, what it actually does is it shows us what your self-consumption is, what you inject into the grid, and what your solar system produces. So let's make this real simple, because it can get really muddy once we start using all different variables. But let's say your solar system produces 1,200 kilowatt hours. Let's go for the definition. Export means you're putting into the grid. Import means you're bringing back from the grid. And self-consumption means what's going directly from your solar panels directly to your consumption, what you're actually turning on in the house. So if you have your air conditioner, you have your refrigerators, all that stuff, it's going directly from the solar panels directly to your consumption. And then there's the 49% rule. The 49% rule is based off of this production. So they take the 49% of what your system produced. And then there's another portion here called the rollover kilowatt hours. Okay. So if your system produces 1,200 kilowatt hours in 1 month in January, let's say, and you export into the grid 600, and let's say you self-consumed 600 kilowatt hours, that means you have 590 kilowatt hours of credit. But you brought back from the grid at night 600 kilowatt hours. So you would have 10 kilowatt hours as a rollover that we'll go over to next month's production. So let's take a look at what you're going to be charged at. Again, with ISE, it's 5 cents per kilowatt hour that you are going to be charged for that energy that you put into the grid and you brought back. So that means that lowest amount of energy is going to be $29.50. Now, the remaining percentage, because you have another 10 kilowatt hours that is not being credited, will be charged at the highest rate of your bandwidth. Because here in Costa Rica, they have bandwidths, and it goes depending on the amount of kilowatt hours that you use. Since it's only 10 kilowatt hours, anything below 250 kilowatt hours is roughly at 17 cents. That's including taxes. So that's $1.70 that you would actually be paying for that highest amount. Now, if you didn't have a solar and you were using 1,200 kilowatt hours a month, you would be paying, based on ISE with taxes, $304 for that electricity. So let's go to the February. Again, what we talked about, that rollover goes into the production. So you get $12.10 for your production. You have export 600, you import 600, self-consume 600. This time, the 49% is based on that total production of 1210. So that means you get 600 kilowatt hours, but you still got 10 kilowatt hours for rollover for next month. So that means $30 you're going to be paying for the lowest amount at 5 cents. And that month you will not pay anything for the highest amount.
So, Scott, I do want to just inject over here for a second that in order to maybe take a look on more particular potential savings for your electric bills, I just posted in the questions and answer my email address that you're very welcome to just send your electric bill, just write over there your name and maybe location where you live. And I'll be more than happy in the next 24, 48 hours to come back to you just to understand, to give you an idea or preliminary analysis of what is your potential savings in your particular location, including the electric company that you're using.
Perfect. That makes good sense to just put it in into the questions and answers there. So the next topic, let's talk about the 15% circuit rule. What does that mean? What is the 15% circuit rule? Well, if we look at the electric grid, you have what we call circuits. Okay, you might have all different houses, communities, whatever, and the circuits have generation stations. Okay, and those generation stations might be a hydro, it might be whatever, and then you have distribution systems. They're all basically, again, a circuit. So the rule basically states that any renewable energy, such as wind, solar, or hydro plants, can't be more than 15% of the electrical circuit. This rule originally was set to stabilize the grid and prevent overcapacity of renewable sources. In markets such as Germany, California, and other markets that have a lot of solar, it could have created a destabilization issue. And so the problems that they had too much solar energy. This would create what we call the famous duck curve when it comes to nighttime demand is being met by peaker plants. So if you look at this graph, and actually this was the past California, they had a lot of problems with this. And what would happen is if you look at the times, 12 a.m. to basically 6:30 or 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, again, North America, different times for the wake up and everything else of solar systems. But you can see here where that in the solar production, you would actually have a curve that was going up and over. And the demand for the energy off of the grid, of course, that dipped, that went down. And then around 6 o'clock, what would happen is everybody'd come home, they turn on their air conditioners, the lights, they'd start cooking and whatever. And now the peaker plants and everything has to ramp up to increase for that demand. Okay. So again, that was why they were trying to stabilize it. The only issue is that 15%, nobody knows where it came from. To tell you the truth, everybody I've talked to, nobody knows where that percentage could have been 18, could have been 10, who knows? But it was never told to us why 15%. So here in Costa Rica, the electric companies are using it as a tool to slow down distributed generation. Again, this whole process is based on our experiences, the consumer and the solar installation companies. Because what's happening is when we're putting those permits out there and we're putting in solar, because of the policies and how they're set, this is what we're running into. And we're actually seeing it being used as a barrier. We've been in situations where they're telling us, hey, this circuit is closed, we can't put any more. And like, there's no hydro plants, there's nothing around. And we're questioning, where is the information that you can determine that? And of course, they're not telling us this. So there's been a lot of third-party studies to show that Costa Rica actually needs to add much more distributed generation, in other words, solar, to stabilize the grid during dry season especially, okay? So as you know, solar, as actually the highest peaks of solar in Costa Rica, is normally December, January, February, and March. April and May is when you're coming into rainy season and it starts to slow down. We only see as a company about 20% difference between the high peaks and the low peaks, 20 to 30%. So what's happened is with today's technology in a lot of these marketplaces, they're using these inverters that are in the solar systems now to be able to change the frequency, change the voltage and amperages so that you don't have these drastic curves. And of course, using solar storage is another portion of this. So it prevents that duck curve, and it also lowers the cost for peaker plants. So what are the problems with the current decree? Well, first, that production meter that we were talking about, the 49% rule, is not standardized amongst all the companies. So what does that mean? We've run into situations where ICE is requesting that for solar systems, and in certain markets of ICE, that they want both of the meters that are supposed to be outside of your property at the edge, they want them to be remotely read so that they can read it, from not having to go out and view it. And that's okay because we a lot of the other companies do it as well, but they're using a different meter. They're using the 3G meter, which means that the meters are $2,000 a piece. That means you have to invest $4,000 just for meters. And on top of that, they want you to get what we call a post-pago agreement with the communications, which is Kobe, for communicating to there. So you have to pay not only that $2,000 per meter, but also another fee per month post-pago to communicate that information. Now, they're all approved by RCEP, the meters themselves, but the electric companies have the right to say which ones they want to use. In Cope Winnecoste, they don't mind having all the meters in front. If you got them in front, no problem. But if you have your production meter inside the house and you can't get it to the front because of all different barriers that you might have, they will allow you to do remote metering, and their meter is $250. And all you do is you put it in the meter, and they have a repeater, like a repeater portion where you go and you put this screen out in the front. And so when they read the meter, they read both of the meters at the same time. Okay. Now, again, one of the interesting parts about this is that the second meter, the production meter, is how you actually pay your taxes. Okay. It's not based on what you consume. It's based on how much you're producing. Luckily, these taxes are very low, and they're such small amounts that it's not a problem, and most people are happy to pay for it because it's actually going to the bomberos. Now, second, at this moment, there is no place to go if you have a problem or a dispute when you're in the process of permitting. So we've had a lot of situations where, we had issues with the electric companies, and we're like, okay, let's go to MINAE. And when they first came out with this decree, they had to determine if it was going to be a private contract or if it was going to be a public service. So since distributed generation is considered not a public service and a contract between electric companies and the consumer, this is in the hands of MINAE, as we talked about. They're the ones that are in charge of the policy, the procedures. But MINAE states that if you don't have a contract with the electric company, because when you're in this process of permitting, you don't, they can't help you with any disputes. So we've had situations where we're like, okay, well, we can't go to MINAE because they just told us this. And then we go to RCEP and they're like, yep, we can help you. And then we get to the process and it doesn't work. It doesn't help. So the electric companies, depending on what zone of the country you are in, are different in how they handle their customers. Now, we don't have problems with Cope Winnecoste. We don't have problems with majority of ESA, except for certain regions. And so it's really interesting to see, again, there's no place to go if you have a dispute. So in some cases, the processes can take a couple of weeks. And in other areas, it can be 8 months. So third is this 15% rule. Again, as we talked about, it's based on your circuit. And in many cases, the rule, as you'll actually go into the links above, there was two reports that was actually written. One was in, I think, 2015 and 17, which was actually done by the International Development Bank. And then the latest one was actually the university from Spain that actually came up with another report. And you can actually see these reports either going to the top, or you can actually click on this link and you can see them. We put them in English so everybody can see it. But it's really interesting. All of these disprove the 15% rule. It should not be based on 15%. It should just be based on your total circuit. And that is what's really interesting, is there's a lot of pressure that's showing that 15% rule doesn't have any merit and that, it should be disbanded. So at this moment, again, the electric company is using it as a tool to stop the distributed generation. We've seen that where they say, oh, everything's closed. And then all of a sudden, they've actually come back and they went to the clients and said, hey, we can install solar too. So they've actually gone around the installation companies and tried to install solar. And the clients are like, hey, we're not going to go with that route. And so they actually put in energy storage or other things. So this is pushing, again, many of the consumers to look for alternative energy storage, such as batteries and solar. And right now, that in our case is about 90% of our business is installing the LG battery and the solar system, because people are really upset about how the electric companies are actually handling these permitting processes. So again, the fourth portion of this is the fees for permitting is established by the electric companies, not RSF. Normally, RSF sets the rates like we talked about before. But because it's distributed generation, it's not a public service, the electric companies are starting to change those fees. Now, in the past, when we first started doing with CNFL, no problem, $30, $40, I think it was $100 at the max, and we can start the process, not a problem. Then you have to also go through the College of Engineering, because there's 3 steps to this process. You have to go through the College of Engineering. You got to, go through that process. But now CNFL, within the last year, had changed their fee, and they're charging $800 just for the permitting fee. And then, of course, they throw the taxes on there and everything else. It comes out to be about $1,000. But in most marketplaces around the world, you have a third party that processes those permits. And that's where, again, the issue is when you have the electric companies, again, processing permits, it's just different. Every one of them is doing it differently. Cope Winnecoste, they charge based on your electric bill and all these other different things. But basically, there's all different ranges of what they're charging for those fees. And it needs to be changed, and RSEP needs to take charge of that. So, are there any questions? We'll open it up for everybody that might ask questions.
So, Scott, as you're going with the presentation, there are already several questions that have been asked and answered. So, just like maybe to get everyone a little more involved, I will present some of them. There was a question by George Storms regarding if there is a rollover after a certain percentage. So I just wanted to clarify a particular part of that. In most of the electric companies, there is a rollover for 12 months. In most of them, it runs between November to November of the next year. So if you have, to make it as simple as possible, if you overproduce during summertime a certain amount of electricity, you will start seeing in the rainy season, when production goes lower, that you're starting to use this surplus overproduction to offset your electric bill during day and night time consumption. So whatever you will import will still have the credits from the previous months of the overproduction. So yes, it's rollover for 12 months, November until November. The second question was over there by Glenn, that in Ojochal also is a viable location for residential solar installation. Well, in our experience, the answer is yes. I think that a pretty good chunk of our installations this year are in Ojochal's area, everywhere between Dominical, Escaleras, Uvita, Ojochal, and a little bit southern than that. I personally live in Ojochal. I will be happy to meet in our office in Uvita or with any person in the area to explain more, to come into a site visit. But we're seeing again and again in this area that the 15% of saturation, if that was mainly the question, so there is lots of availability in this area. That being said, the Puerto Cortes, the ISE office in this area, and Uvita, those guys are tough. Like they try to put obstacles. again and again. And again, luckily, we just are in the business for many, many years to know already how to overcome those obstacles. I have to say that I would really not recommend nobody goes alone to fight against ISE or to try doing the permitting process by himself. It requires a pretty good knowledge of how to do it. And we're assisting any person that wish to go through the permitting process to fight those people, and we win. We don't have a single system in the area over here to clarify that wasn't being permitted. So there we keep going with some other questions by Glenn. What type of meters and costs are required by ISE in Ojochal? So in ISE, regardless the location of the country you are in, the meters that they require are similar. In most cases, we're seeing that it's roughly $250 per each of the 2 meters requires. So you can put between $500 to $600, like in your estimation, the cost of the actual meters. Although it's a little, there won't be additional cost for you on that, but just to let you know that those meters need to go through a process to be certified in CNFL labs, and later on to get an actual ticket of the number of the meter. We have in our company electric engineer that is in charge of that particular like a segment. So you don't go with all of the headaches of running between, I think it's around 4 to 5 different ISE's offices until you actually have the meter ready to be installed at your house. So the cost of the actual meters put around 600 tops, and then there's some associated cost of the actual permitting process per each electric company. It can run between 300, 350 to up to 700, depends on the size of the house. And then the last one was who sell the meters on the ISE. That was by Leonel. So no, Leonel, ISE do not sell meters. They have a third-party companies that we're working with to purchase those meters. Once you get into that portion, we're just getting you in direct touch with the provider of those meters, or that you will pay our company and we will purchase it from the provider in order to just make it faster. So it's just an internal process that I won't get too much into it, but it's just in order to already get meters that are certified, that went through the labs of CNFL, so we can go to the next step with ISE to get them registered. And those phases are really, they take time. And if any of you worked with ISE in the past, you know that to get something from them, that you're the client, to pay something, it can take time. Think about it now that you will take money out of them, something that will disincentivize them to work fast. So again, that's why solar companies are having their business to assist folks like you to get it happen. Any other questions, please post it over there in the Q&A, and we'll be more than happy to keep answering the questions as the flow or at the end of each section of the presentation. So Scott, back to you.
I was just looking at some of the other ones too. There's, I guess Christopher was asking, what are the possibilities to reform the process politically? And that's going to be coming up in the next portion of it. It's very interesting to see, but there are 2 parts to this that are going to be happening, and that is a decree. And there's actually a bill right now that's been introduced into Congress. Unfortunately, the bill is, again, it's a vehicle to get it into a law, but it needs to go again through the deputados and that whole process. What are the meters costs in HACO and the cost for a system for a 2 to 3 story bedroom? Again, that is actually going to depend on how many kilowatt hours you use and those kind of things. And if you have any questions, you can contact us about that regarding that. But the permitting aspect of it, the permitting fees and everything else are all the same. It's not based on what size of house you are. At this moment, it's not based on it. But it's based on, again, ISE versus CNFL versus Copeland Acoste. And somebody was even asking, somebody with a 3,000 to 4,000 watt solar system, you still have to pay $800. If you're CNFL, yes. If you're CNFL, they're still requiring, it doesn't matter how small the system is, it doesn't matter how big the system is, they're going with a straight fee.
Right, and also give a little also input into that. There is, Christopher, other options that you have. Like you don't have to go through the permitting process necessarily if you do have sufficient energy storage to charge the battery during daytime with the overproduction and utilize it during nighttime. So there are different ways. We have several clients that went through that route, that they have decided to just not go through the permitting process, to do have the battery as their main source of the surplus of the overproduction. So there are ways. It really depends on what your needs, what is your daytime and nighttime consumption, and we'll be more than happy again to more particularly define that with you and see what will be your best options. And Scott, there was another question over here by Glenn that I'm confused. Are we required to put energy back to the grid as being discussed, or can we store our own power? So again, Glenn, in case that a solar system as it is, like the solar panels and the inverter, do not have any way to store with the solar panel the surplus energy. In order to store energy, you will have to have a battery. That's a part of how it works. And you will be able, you can store the surplus energy of every day and utilize it at nighttime. And all depends again of how much overproduction you will have and what will be the capacity of the battery to store this energy. And again, we'll be more than happy to go in very particular cases to answer that privately. But the answer is yes, you can do that at any time. There was another one,
and that's we're going to be talking in the next proposal, which is we'll be answering some of those questions as well.
With 6 months for ISE. Okay, so Christopher, Christopher, I have over here that you said that we're building a 372 square meters house in Atenas. We've been told by one company that we need to wait 6 months for ISE to assess our energy needs before it can be even apply for a permit or have a system installed. Is that correct? Okay, so there are different exceptions in the way of how ISE are working with new constructions that they do apply. They have the right to apply such a like requirement to wait several months before you can actually go ahead and get over with, not get over, sorry, to keep the permitting process.
But I'd like to interject something in there because there is something that is changed about that with the new proposal. Regarding the 6 months, and it's only a couple of electric companies that were requiring that. If it's new construction and they wanted to have 6 months worth of billing before they would allow you to install a solar system, or before they would go through the permitting, because they wanted to know how much energy that you're using. But now it's changed with the new proposal and the way it's worded. It's not going to be, you don't have to wait 6 months. You just have to give them what you are estimating your consumption is going to be. So that's really the interesting part to this, is that we'll talk about this in a little bit, but basically some of the problems that we were having before have changed. And it's really based on what MINAE's thought process is regarding each one of these.
Right, and it's also not consistent, Christopher, sorry. That like we see like homes, new construction with ISE that they do not ask for that. And I think that we have seen a month ago one home that they have asked for that. So it's also something that it's not consistent within ISE if they will ask for that 6 month history or not.
No, in fact, Copa Winnicasti doesn't even ask for it.
Yeah, and the way that how Scott started to explain about it, there will be an estimation that will be signed by an electric engineer based on the electric plants. What is the estimated consumption? So you won't need to go through that like 6 month period of the history of consumption.
Mhm. So let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and we'll go over what is the new proposed policy for net meterings and the pros and cons.
Great. And I will keep answering some of the questions over here in the chat. All right, Scott, are we ready to come back? Just going to keep answer some of the questions presented over here. Let's see. We have George that asked, how long the batteries last now? Do they have to be replaced every 4 years or something? So the same technologies that you're seeing in those batteries behind over here by LG, it's the very, very same cells that are used in the electric vehicles, leading manufacturers or brands like BMW, and there goes a long list. So there is no clear figure number answer of how many years the batteries will last, like to give a straight answer. But the leading manufacturers such as LG, Panasonic, and then goes those quality of lithium-ion batteries, they states that basically all of those lithium-ion batteries will probably have a lifespan that increased the 15 years more towards the 20 years, and it can go way more than that. But that's what they're kind of stating as per the moment. When we work with a larger manufacturers such as NEC, they're out of the pocket answer was 17 to 18 years. And using the same cells, the same LG batteries, just in larger capacities for more commercial and industrial activities. So it's not like the lead acid batteries that you will see that those are to be replaced, or the AGM, lead acid, and gel. They usually depends on how you utilize them, between 3.5, 4 years in average to 6 years. Some that are lucky can even reach more, but most of them can't reach that. The lithium-ion batteries are a technology that is here to last, and that's why you see that most of the manufacturers are starting to go towards that direction in the combination of solar and energy storage. Very, very common to see now lithium-ion penetrating in all markets, and of course also to Costa Rica. So to try and give the easiest answer, I will say between 15 to 20 years will probably be a good figure to provide.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. I lost communication there. The internet went down for about 5 minutes. So,
okay, welcome back, Scott.
So, okay, so let's move forward to the new proposed policy for net metering. So, why is a new decree needed? Well, believe it or not, it's a requirement based on the previous or the current distributed generation regulation. It's kind of interesting, but the regulation that was set forth on September 14th, 2015 requires periodic modifications and adaptations to the text in order to be able to keep up with today's technology, innovations, and development, improving it and introducing new necessary concepts that contribute to improve the quality of the safety of the facilities and the grid itself. So it's kind of interesting because this new policy, again, they've been trying to get this passed. They started last year in 2019. Actually, it was a little bit before that. But what happened is in May of 2020, they gave the new draft to a lot of the players that are in concern. So they gave it to the ministries, and they gave it to the Chamber of Industries. They gave it to installation companies and organizations just to get a feedback. And then they start the approval process, which the first step is actually putting it in an open forum. Put it in the Gazette, and the Gazette for 1 month, they had over 40 organizations and companies that made comments, during this 1 month time. And then they stopped the comments. They stopped that 1 month, and they turned around and they gave the draft to make. Now, MAKE is actually the Ministry of Economic, and they basically have many functions, but one of the functions that they set up to do is to actually streamline processes. So if you have a process that you're putting in place to streamline it so you don't have as much red tape, it has to go through MAKE. And in this case, it failed because the policy was not streamlined enough. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the problems that we're looking at. And really, it's because they weren't streamlined. They didn't have the permitting processes and all this stuff, the contracts and all that stuff. Nothing was templated, which was the job of MINAE. So today, where is it today? Well, that proposal is now sitting back at MINAE's, because once it gets rejected from MAKE, then it had to go back to MINAE. And now MINAE is trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? How are we going to change? How are we going to, what are we going to do to do this? And the proposal is getting a lot of attention at this moment because the media and the electric companies and the unions and all this stuff are having issues. The electric companies, their unions are very powerful. I think it's ESA has over 7 or 8 different unions. And, again, when they're looking at and saying, oh, this doesn't meet our, this is going to hurt us or whatever, they're actually putting a lot of, pushback from that. And then again, when you look at the consumers part of this, a lot of the problems are not being discussed. Okay. So we're going to talk about or highlight the issues of the elimination of the 49% rule, but what to expect, definitions of systems established MINAE, which I believe is probably one of the best things that MINAE did here. We'll talk about that in a minute. Introductions of virtual metering, and an introduction to Sensei and their responsibilities. And then we're going to talk about why is it important to know and understand the new policy for the future of Costa Rica and who is standing up for the consumer. So the elimination of the 49% rule. Yippee! Everybody's like, yeah, it doesn't even talk about the 49% rule in the new draft. But that's kind of scary because, again, they don't talk about the 49% rule and they don't talk about that second meter. So again, as we talked about, majority of the consumers are not financially affected by that 49% rule because, again, anything that you don't lose rolls over the next month. However, it is being used as a barrier because of that second meter and the cost of running those power lines out to the edge of your property or using that remote meter. The production meter cannot be eliminated at this moment until MINAE can figure out the taxation for the services of the fire department and all the rest. So again, it's great, it's gone, but if you look in this draft, that nowhere does it discuss that second meter. And that's where the problem lies, because once you go through this policy, and if it was implemented and you started going through the permitting process, first thing the electric companies say, sorry, you got to have that second meter. Well, why? Where does it say it? That's how we determine taxes. That's how that goes. So, the definitions by MINAE about grid-tied, isolated, and parallel operations. This is one of the best things that I think MINAE actually did in this process. And that is they actually started making, they knew that with the marketplace the way it is around the world and how go to California, you go to Germany, you go to Australia, and all these energy storage and all these different portions of the solar industry are being implemented. They had to define this, and we're going to be talking about that. The first presidential decree, Costa Rica was just getting their toe in the water. They didn't see what responses was going on with the consumer. And I think they're overwhelmed because actually the consumer is, yeah, I want it. And especially when you get into commercials and industrials, because when you put in Demanda and all these, the cost of energy is so expensive here. I mean, our energy costs here are similar to the highest marketplaces in the United States, such as California and Hawaii. So most professionals and government officials didn't understand how advanced the solar industries are, and the policies did reflect that. In the new decree, MINAE created some of the definitions to help the electric companies and the consumer clear up the gray areas, which was created by the first decree and the lack of knowledge. Now, MINAE has established the clear definitions of what grid tied and net metering is. They also talked about what is isolated or off-grid and parallels, a system that is set up for zero export and not taking advantage of net metering. And if you click on this link, it will actually take you to the document, the proposed draft, and this is where you will see their definitions here. So as you can see, UVWX, it talks about isolated operation. And I want to point out here, when you start looking at the proposals for any of these, they'll have GD, AMS, NS. Just visually look at that and say consumer. And reality is distributed generation is the consumer. So the operation of the consumer system that is permanently disconnected, meaning a off-grid system. It's not connected at all to the grid. Island operation. Now, island operation is the condition of the consumer system that energizes after opening a protection system. So when the grid goes down and you have a battery backup system, okay, that is considered an island operation. Running parallel operation and parallel operation without delivery of surplus power. So what happens when you're running parallel, and let's say you have a device that prevents that energy from going into the grid. That is running parallel without delivery of surplus. You have a system, a solar system, that might even have a battery and it might not, but you are not putting energy into the grid. When we install our systems, and luckily we're using a very smart system with Solar Edge, whenever we install it, we always make sure that at the very beginning, we run it parallel. That way, when we leave the property, the consumer gets the benefits the day we install the system. It's operating, but it's not sending into the grid. And you have, if you do have the LG battery, you're using that at nighttime. So that's what we call parallel. This sets up now a conversation of permitting and certifications. So the new policy, this is where it gets really interesting. In the new policy, if you are exporting into the grid and you use the net metering policy, you will need to be permitted. You'll have to go through those 3 steps. You have to go through the same process. But if you don't have electricity going to the property, but you need a solar system, meaning off-grid, you will need to have it certified. So think about this. You have a house out in the middle of the jungles. You have 6 or 7 panels, and now they want you to have it certified. So you don't have to go through the same permitting process. You basically, I think it's 3 or 4 steps. But one of them is you're going to have a certified electrical engineer actually certify it. Now, if you want to use your solar system with a battery for day and night self-consumption, such as running parallel, you will need to have that certified as well. So what they're just trying to do is they're trying to track out how much solar they have, because at this moment, they don't even know how much solar is out there. So why?
I would like to interrupt for a second over here, just for something that we're seeing lately more and more in this area, also of Ochalo Vita. When you're looking on different options and you have someone that offer you a solar system, rather has a battery or don't have a battery, there will be different disputes about like the legality of it. How does it work with the permitting, without the permitting, and so it goes. So what we've seen lately, Scott, more and more, again, at least in our area, is that many small operation companies are they offer a system that works in parallel, but it doesn't have like any export limitation devices. So basically, in other words, we're seeing that there's a solar system that definitely will have certain times of the day that will overproduce electricity and feed it back in the grid. So one of the things to take a look very carefully when you do get an option of purchasing a solar system is how do you make sure that you work in parallel with the grid and not feeding back into it, and not just use the good faith that probably it won't happen or something like that.
Oh yeah, that is very true. We've seen that in many marketplaces in Costa Rica where people are putting in systems and they tell their clients, oh, just turn it off when you're not using any electricity in your house. Well, that's a bad idea, because what's going to happen is that energy is going to go into the grid and it actually increases your bill, because if you don't have a bidirectional meter out front, it's thinking that you're actually using more energy than you are, because any energy that goes into the grid, it's actually duplicating that. So that is a problem that we've seen, where a lot of companies don't understand what zero export means. And really, it comes down to the type of product that you're purchasing, because they're like the Solar Edge, Fronius, SMAs. A lot of these will have a meter that you install, and it will tell that inverter to increase or decrease the production based on your demand. So, that's really the interesting part, because in the past, electric companies were really upset because they were like, oh, this is unlawful. You can't do that. Well, first, it's behind the meter. And that's why all of this is important to talk about, because MINAE actually in the past would say, well, as long as you have a product that's not that's preventing you from feeding into the grid and behind the meter, electric companies have no legal right to go inside your house and turn off your system. There is no such thing as an illegal solar system. But if you are sending energy in the grid and you don't have a permit, that's a different product. Now all of a sudden you're sending energy into the grid, and if you don't have the right equipment and the grid goes down and somebody's operating on the grid, you could kill them by injecting energy into that grid. So what has happened is because of us pushing, with our systems, MINAE turned around and said, wait a second here, we got to put this in black and white and have this in the new proposal. And that's why they established these definitions, which is really, I think, incredible that MINAE is doing this in this case. So the next topic is introducing virtual self-consumption. In the new draft, MINAE has introduced a new concept called virtual self-consumption. This is driven by really a couple installation companies that ran into the problems with that 15% rule, okay, with large commercial systems. And what happens is they couldn't install it because those circuits were closed. So virtual self-consumption is the distributed generation mode for self-consumption, where the consumer detaches the consumption point from the generation point. In this mode, the consumer producer of the system that produces surplus records that on one meter, and that is the generation point, but it's recognized in the consumption point. What does all this mean? This mumbo jumbo means is that if you have a house or a system in San Jose, and that grid is shut down because of that 15% rule. And let's say you have a farm up in Winnicoste and you put a solar system up there, it can offset your meter here in the San Jose area. Okay. So if you're a big commercial project and you say, guess what? ESA says that this 15% rule, the circuit's done. I'm going to buy, a couple of hectares up in Winnicoste, and I'm going to put a solar system in it, and it's going to offset me here in the Central Valley. So this could open up, this kind of virtual self-consumption could open up also another path that nobody's even thinking about, and that is community solar, which means, let's say you have a group of houses and they don't have, the ability to generate that energy. The question would be is, could you buy a couple of hectares and have a group of houses with different meters on them that have different people's names and generate that energy and offset it here in the Central Valley? So even though this is a new door which MINAE has chosen to open, there are a lot of obstacles they need to overcome before it really becomes a reality. And first is the billing between the electric companies. I mean, right now we're having issues with billing with water and electricity and everything else. Can you imagine now all of a sudden you have Copa and Winnicoste having to talk to each other and actually come up with the billing issues there? Or actually another bigger one is the adaptation to new technology for metering. And of course, the pushbacks from the electric companies' unions. That's a big one there. So the next topic we have is the introduction of Sensei and their responsibilities. Now, a lot of people don't even know what Sensei is. They don't even understand what it is, but it's really the Centro Nacional de Control de Energia. In other words, they're the people that are actually controlling the national grid. They control the movement of energy between the electric companies, ESA, to Copa Winnicoste, to HOXEC, and all these. And they also control the import and export from Costa Rica. I don't know if everybody knows, but there's actually a line that comes directly from Mexico all the way down to Panama, and that's what we call the mirror. And they can actually send energy back and forth to the different countries. And Sensei is the ones that actually control that. The problem is this entity is located in the headquarters of Grupo ICE, which is Costa Rica's partly owned electric company. ICE and Sensei has been under fire for a very long time because they are so closely connected. Many organizations and people are pushing to relocate Sensei outside of ICE and directly maybe under a government umbrella or someplace else. So in the new policy, in the draft, MINAE has come up with the definition of Sensei. They say the operator of the national electric system, a technical unit that has the responsibility to direct and coordinate an operation of the national grid and the national electric market, meet the country's electric demands, as well as the coordination and execution of the transfer of electricity. But if you go through this draft, it's really interesting, but MINAE does not mention Sensei in it. It just says grid operator, which is, to me, very compelling. So in the new draft, it also lays out the operator in Article 9, the operator of the national security systems, and what the functions are. And you'll actually can go and see this. But some of the alarming ones that are definitely a problem for distributed generation or the consumer is they want them, MINAE wants Sensei to define the technical requirements required for the integration of the consumer into the national system, into the grid, to maintain safety, quality, and performance according to the national regional regulations. They want them to review and complementary studies carried out by the electric companies and validate the procedure used in the preparation of the study of the producer consumer, and MINAE in the cases requested. What does that mean? Well, If you have a dispute with that 15%, you can actually make ESA or whoever do another study. Okay, right now, the only thing that CNFL does is they're actually publishing on a website, which systems are closed. They're not telling you why. But what they were looking at is how they can actually charge if you want to have an additional study. Because when you go through the permitting process, the very first part of that is you have to have a study of the grid. And that's all part of your payment and everything else. We understood that they were actually looking at, ESA was looking at saying, okay, if you want another study, that's going to cost $5,000. That was going to cost up to $5,000. Now, they're asking that Sensei would actually be part of that. Now, the definitions and specifications to ensure the interconnection and interoperability of the consumer systems, and they want to define the information requirements to be provided by the consumer and power companies in order to ensure and maintain the safe operation. Again, it's putting Sensei in a position which they were never designed to be. Okay, they don't have places where the consumer can walk in and say, hey, I have a problem or anything like that. There's no customer service at all, but yet they're using Sensei in a different light, and that's a big problem. So why is it important to know and understand the new policy for the future of Costa Rica and who is standing up for the consumer? Well, Costa Rica is still in the best position. All the problems that we're having, it's around the world. Every marketplace, when you have a disruptor such as solar or any of these things, you're always going to have pushback, and you're always going to have that. But when we look at the policies today, the 1 kilowatt hour at such a low rate, in other marketplaces, instead of getting 1 whatever 1 kilowatt you put in, they might give you a half a kilowatt at a different rate. And then in some cases, in some marketplaces, they won't allow you to inject at certain times of the day. And that's time of use. So a lot of these situations, if we still look at today's problems that we're having here in Costa Rica, it is still the best position in Central America. And with the new technology and new concepts of doing business, it's just getting better and better. So here in Costa Rica, you can truly live an autonomous lifestyle by installing solar and using electric vehicles. In the upcoming seminars that we're going to do, we're going to be actually talking about more autonomous lifestyles using electric vehicles. And we've actually partnered up with a EV company called EV Imports. And also what's happening in the other parts of the world that will be happening here soon is you're going to be able to use your vehicle as your battery. So if you have a 60 kilowatt hour vehicle and you only use 15 kilowatt hours a day for your daily commutes, now all of a sudden at night, instead of using the grid or instead of purchasing another battery, you can use your EV to do that. And in most other marketplaces, there are a lot more barriers to overcome and less incentives. So Costa Rica is still in that sweet spot because the cost of energy here is so expensive. And again, we talked about, the 1 kilowatt hour low tariffs and 3 to 5 cents. Now, there is, some talk that, someday RSEP might change those, it might go up, because is that really showing the cost of energy to store it into the grid and everything else? That's debatable. Okay. But, even if it goes up to 10 cents, it's still cheaper than paying the lowest rate, which is 17 cents per kilowatt hour.
Right. And Scott, I want to jump over here to do like just give one little part about SolarEdge in that respect. That one of the very cool things that we're seeing lately and more relevant with the project that we chose working with is that you do have more flexibility of how to be more independent from those regulations, and that's a real cool part of it. Just for example, that in CNFL there's like hourly tariffs that you pay more in certain hours of the day, right? In peak hours in the morning, some on the valley, and then less in nighttime. So just to give an example, by using one of the LG batteries in a study that we've done recently, you can save between $850 to a little more than $1,000 just having this arbitrage, as they call it, charging in certain times of the night and offset it on the peak hours. And then, as you just said before, that like in different profiles, when you already have the electric vehicle charger directly run from the inverter, you can already also offset some of the nighttime consumption, or instead of sending it back to the grid and get some credit, guess what? You're charging the electric vehicle and pay nothing for it. So even that the credits are 3 to 5 cents, which is a very good like a benefit, still zero is lower than 3 cents and then 5 cents. So it's some of those, again, I think cool features that that we're seeing that changes people's mind by using just the intelligent technologies that is out there, and we're seeing that increase of like companies in the big leasing companies in the US that they're using those solar systems in order to reduce their operational expenses, because you do have more and more capabilities of how to work with the different regulations of the different utility companies. And of course, it's with combination of other devices such as energy storage, such as now they have those hot water heater, shifting of energy in the electric vehicles, and so it goes. So kind of, I think that we're also in a good spot of offering different, that people really have the option to rather say, you know what, I'm a nighttime person and I do want to go through the permitting process and get all of the benefits. And some other people will actually be able to use different technologies to overcome the need of going through the permitting process in certain scenarios. So just to give,
I think you're right about that, because that's one of the things that, like I say, I give kudos to MINAE in the cases that they're actually in a tough position. They're in a position where they're having to deal with the unions and everybody else, and they're trying to come up with a policy that would be best for all. And running parallel and having it actually defined in there is a huge thing, because now all of a sudden you can live that autonomous lifestyle and maybe only import 5% of your own energy needs, whatever it is. And you don't need to have a permit. We have quite a few systems that are like that. And they're just like, hey, I don't even want to go through the permit. My lifestyle is this way, and I can just put in 2 batteries and a solar system, and I'm good for 25 years. Not an issue. And so that actually brings to us, if you look here, you actually can see 2 batteries, and you have the inverter, and you have this. This is actually one of our systems that we are actually a Delta, what they call a Delta site for SolarEdge, and we're doing testing on certain products. And we have quite a few homes that have 2 batteries or more, and that's because they want to be more autonomous. So who's actually standing up for your rights? Well, there's an organization here called Costa Rica Solar, and they've been in since a long time. They were 2005, 2000, whatever. And they're actually the founders of Costa Rica Solar. One of them is actually President of ISE right now. So it's kind of interesting, but they're standing up for the consumer and the installation, and they're trying to, get the policies set up for the consumer. And we also have 20 or 30 solar installation companies. Costa Rica Solar Solutions is one of them. And we're all part of this, trying to, again, put the pressure, fight the fight. But we need your help. We need as much consumers now to actually sign up and to be part of ASE Solar, so we have a bigger voice. And that's one of the webinars that we're going to do is how to be more active and part of this. Because if we have more people that are interested in this, either the consumers that already have solar systems or consumers that are interested in getting solar systems, we need everybody. And so here's actually a link you can actually go to once you get this webinar. So that brings us to any questions. Do we have any questions at the end of this final round?
I have a question, Scott. When is the next webinar?
We're going to be doing that in 2 weeks. And we're going to do that with electric vehicles and living autonomously using solar systems and the new systems that are out there. And we're going to go through that and show some of our systems that we have that already have electric vehicles. And we're hoping to bring on one of the largest importers of EVs, and that's EV Imports.
All right, excellent. Okay, Sylvia, your question, just a second. Okay, Peter, thank you very much for the instruction. Perfect. George, please feel free to send us an email, and we'll be very happy to help you with anything that you need. So, are there delays in installing solar systems because of COVID? Sincerely, actually, almost none. Like, we're talking about maybe a week here and a week there with logistics that sometimes are just being delayed in customs, but technically, no. The team has letters that they can travel throughout the country to install solar systems. So if they're just like allowed to go and work, they're working with all the protection materials like the gloves and the mask and everything needed. So sincerely, no. Actually, our team is quite busy lately, even more than we wanted to be in this time. So we're doing pretty well in that part. And there's another question: is Tesla an option? Yes, Tesla is an option if you want to get a battery that has no warranties in country and need to smuggle it in. So yes, we can do that, but we won't recommend it. We try to work with Tesla for a long time, and as it's not a marketplace that seems so attractive to them for the residential portion, it's just not viable to install a battery that has no warranty in country.
And I also like to inject something in there, Ben, and that is, and we're going to discuss about that with the energy storage, is the difference between Tesla versus the LG system. I mean, we're not just selling LG because, whatever. But Tesla, the problem with them is that's what we call an AC coupled system, where the LG and the Solar Edge is what we call a DC coupled system. So if you, for instance, have a battery or a outage or grid outage during the day, now all of a sudden, instead of pulling from the solar system, it will pull from that battery if it's an AC coupled system. So with the LG and the Solar Edge, if you have a grid outage, it pulls from the solar system, not from the battery.
Okay. Well, Scott, we can put our contacts over here, just that if anyone has any additional question or something that they need our assistance and help with, please really feel very free to contact us anytime. We'll try to get back to you as soon as we can.
Okay. Have a good day.
In the next presentation as well.
And keep safe out there. Thank you for attending. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.